Good morning. I appreciate the offer to be here. I know you always take a chance when you have somebody come and preach, and especially when they've been there before. And so I really appreciate the opportunity to come back. I want to give an advertisement, if you might want to call it that, for next week's lesson, because next week's lesson is actually part 2 of this week's lesson. And I thought, well, I could do it 2 ways. I could preach for an hour and a half, or I could split it in 2. So I think you probably are going to be glad that I split it in 2. I appreciate the men that were scheduled or were on the schedule to speak, being kind enough to allow me to do that. Now, I'm not trying to be rude here. I'm actually trying to do something good for you, and I'm having a problem because I'm not sure how to do all of my phone stuff. Any of you ever have that problem? Okay, so here's the timing. Okay, so I've set my timer for 25 minutes. If it goes off, I'll stop. Okay? Now, you're probably thinking, that's nuts. I've never had a preacher do that. But my wife, well, let me just put it this way. I've been retired for a while, and one day she came to me and said, "You have too many words. You've got to get a job." So I went out and got a job. I'm a para at an elementary school that my son's the principal of. So I have this one little girl. She's a second grader. I had her last year, too. They promoted me to second grade. I was pretty proud of that. But I'll tell you what's amazing is how much you didn't learn in second grade. Every day I learned something. You all know about the silent E? That's pretty cool. And well, anyway, I won't bother you with all that. So I'm timing myself, and I'll try to stop in a reasonable amount of time. You know, I think about the church, and I think about what can we do to be more appealing to the world. And I think one of the things that we've done is we've made church like a lot of other things. You all have a hobby. Have you ever noticed how hobbies sometimes, I think it's part of the American culture. I've been privileged to travel a bunch of different places all over the world. And I think our culture, I think America's great. Don't misunderstand me. I don't have a hat or anything. But I do think America's great. And I don't think it has to be great again. I think it is great. But there are some things in other cultures that I think sometimes are better than what we have. And one of them, I do a lot of mission work in Guatemala. And the Guatemalan people are voted almost every year as the most content people on the face of the earth. And I'm looking at these people, and they live in houses that have dirt floors. Some of them don't have electricity. They have to walk a mile to get some water. And yet they're content. And I'm like, how in the world does that happen? Well, I think we forget something. We take our hobbies and we've enjoyed them, and then we've got to get better at them. That's the American way. We've got to get better. We've got to know more. We've got to have this thing that we can't really afford because we're going to go out and do our hobby. And before long, our hobby becomes a job, and it just takes away the joy of it, the thing that we really enjoyed. And I think Christianity's that same way. I think sometimes we work so hard at being Christians that we forget the ingredient that God gave us of joy. You know, we think about in Luke chapter 2 when he announces the arrival of Jesus. He says, "Do not be afraid. I bring you good news of great joy." We ought to be happy. There is a difference between joy and happy, and I'm not going to get into all the details of it. There's so much similar in our vernacular that we could probably exchange the words. But joy is different because joy is something from the inside. Happiness is what happens to you. And your happiness is determined often by the circumstances you find yourself in. Joy is not like that. So Paul comes along and he kind of reminds the Christian, just like I'm going to try to this morning, you need to remember to have joy. You want to be a magnet that will draw people from the community to your church? When they walk in that door, they ought to see a group of people that are full of joy. I mean, it ought to be on your face. When we leave here, we ought to be smiling and talking to each other and having a good time. And people drive by and say, wonder what's going on over there. Those people really seem to have a lot of joy. So in Philippians chapter 4, Paul's writing, and the verse that most of you know, says, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. And that's where most preachers start this sermon. But I was looking at this one day, and coming from a dysfunctional family, I was looking at it and I said, he's giving us a recipe to how to have joy. And he starts off with conflict. Now, I don't know about you, but probably in my life, the one thing that has robbed me of joy more than anything else is conflict. And especially family conflict. We were talking the other day, some of the people at school, two of their mothers one's going into hospice, the other would probably be going out of hospice, if you know what I mean. I don't mean to be disrespectful. They were talking about how irritating their moms were to take care of. Doesn't that sound awful? But if you've ever done that, doesn't it sound real? And I told them, I said, sometimes I would drive 12 hours to see my mom. I would get there and I would drive around a little bit more, getting up my courage to go see my mom. And that may sound terrible. I love my mom. There's no doubt that I love my mom. I was by her side. But sometimes it's hard to find the joy. So next week's lesson is going to be the follow-up to this. Because this is one of those lessons that you can have a preacher can preach and tell you this and tell you that, and you'll go away thinking, he doesn't live my life. You want me to have joy? You have no idea what I deal with every day. Well, first of all, I probably have more of an idea than you think. But second of all, next week, we're going to talk about that. Because sometimes I think we look at it and say, what's the difference, being a Christian or not being a Christian? The Bible says it rains on the just and the unjust, and we're going to talk about that next week. Please come back, and please bring somebody with you. And then the next week after that, we're going to talk about unnamed heroes in the Bible. I call them no-name heroes. And then the fourth Sunday I'm going to be here. Please bring somebody that is not a Christian or is thinking about being a Christian, because we're going to talk about what must I do to be saved. So that kind of gives you an idea of what's going to happen the next few weeks. But today, we're going to talk about this. And he starts off with, I plead with Euodia and Syntyche to agree with each other in the Lord. Yes, and I ask you, loyal yokefellows, help these women. Conflict in the church can destroy a congregation. I mean, I've seen it happen. I've been heartbroken by what has happened when people get crossed in the church. It can destroy a family. It can make Thanksgiving unbearable. And Christmas, you just can't even hardly think of. And Paul understands that, and he says this robs us of our joy, so we need to do something. And he's asking the other Christians to help these two women. Now, I want to very briefly give you 4 ways you can deal with conflict. Number 1, resolve it. That's the best way. And most of the time, if you actually talk about it, you can resolve the conflict. And we convince ourselves, that's not true. They won't listen to me. They'll just get madder, and I'm not going to talk to them. And you just don't give God a chance to work. But the best way to resolve handle conflict is to resolve it. Talk about it. Try to work it out. See what the problem is. And sometimes you'll be so surprised it's nothing you ever dreamed of. My daughter-in-law's mother is having a hard time at church right now. She's 93 years old, and she sat in the same pew for 40-some years. Her husband died probably 20 years ago, but she sat in that same pew, had a place for her husband, even though, he wasn't there. And visitors came. And they have taken her seat. And she is upset about it. And it seems like no one will do anything about it. And she goes, so she's decided, I'll go earlier. And so she went 20 minutes earlier, and those people were there earlier. And she's just beside herself. And I told my daughter-in-law, I said, why don't you, the next time you go, just walk up to those people and say, hey, there's a little problem you probably don't realize, but you're sitting in my mother's seat. And you look at this shriveled up little 93-year-old lady, who in their right mind is going to be mad that you ask him to move a seat? Conflict isn't really all that hard to resolve. Just talk about it. Number 2, resign yourself to the situation. Sometimes the situation is not going to change. No matter how much you fret and how much you are angry about it, that's just the way it is. You know, Bubba's going to throw his shoes on the floor. I hope nobody's named Bubba here. But you know what I'm trying to say. Sometimes you just have to resolve yourself to the fact that maybe your wife doesn't clean the house quite like you would like her to, but boy, she can cook. And don't tell my wife I said that. Sometimes you just have to resolve yourself to this situation. It's a difference. It's not going to go away. It's not life-threatening. Just accept it. Number 3, redirect your anger. I've spent most of my adult life trying to deal with anger problem. I had a really bad problem with anger. And I finally learned, go for a jog. Well, okay, I don't jog anymore. We live in an earthquake zone, so I'm trying to take care of the earth. But go for a walk, read a book, listen to some music, redirect your anger. Do something positive rather than negative. And then number 4, sometimes you have to retreat. And I tell this, and people get uncomfortable with it, and some people don't really like me to tell this story, but several years ago I was preaching at church, not here, and I got a call to visit one of the ladies in the hospital. I went to the hospital, I walked in a room, and I saw this lady in the bed, and I said, oh, I'm sorry, I was looking for so-and-so. And she said, Brother Dave. And it was her. But her face was so swollen because of the beating her husband gave her that I didn't recognize her. Sometimes you just got to retreat. Sometimes you just got to get out of the situation. There's not going to be a resolution to the situation. So now he gets into the fun part. He says, rejoice in the Lord always. I can say rejoice. He said, let your gentleness, and there's all kinds of different translations of this word, gentleness, moderation, whatever word you want to use, but let it be known to all. Now, I prided myself in high school and college. I was an athlete. I was also 75 pounds lighter. And I saw my wife on campus one day, and I walked by her, and I was almost 5'7". I said, hi there. And then, the way the Lord works, I'm helping teach gymnastics class. And my wife comes to take the class. And I said, here, let me help you get on those parallel bars. None of it worked. But one day I was on the campus, and there were some kids out there, and I started playing with them. And I was laying down and throwing them up in the air. And if you've ever been to Harding's campus, you know the lily pond there. I was not really throwing them, but acting like I was going to throw them in the pond. And my wife walks by, and this is the first time she really noticed me. She said to her friend, I don't know who that guy is, but he's going to be a great daddy someday. What impressed her? I am so grateful it wasn't my bod, or we'd be in a lot of trouble. Gentleness. Think about Jesus with the woman at the well. How gentle. With the woman caught in adultery. By the way, she's one of those no-name heroes. You know, Jesus didn't name her. With the woman with the issue of blood. Gentleness, kindness. With the children. Suffer the children to come unto me. You want joy? You have a little kid put their arms around your neck and just hug you. But the one that gets me every time is Jesus hanging on a cross, being killed and tortured and dying. And he looks to his mom. Mom, behold your son. To John, John, behold your mother. gentleness. That's what brings joy. Then he gives us some kind of practical advice, and he goes on to say, with prayer and petition, make your requests made known to God. Prayer and petition are kind of two different things. Prayer can be a variety of ways to pray. You can pray in praise. You can pray in agony, in the sense of, I just need you, God. I need you so much. And you can pray a lot of different ways. Read the Psalms, and you'll see so many different prayers. Petition is a little bit different, because petition is that part of prayer where you say to God, God, I need you now. It's where you say to God, I am struggling with this. I can't handle this anymore. This is beyond my capacity. I need you, God. And so he says, with prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, make your requests made known to God, and stop being anxious. I've heard sometime, and I kind of believe it. I kind of think I don't get it in the right balance. But somebody told me one time, work as if everything depends on you, and pray as if everything depends on God. And I think I've had that backwards sometimes. But then you've done all you can do. And let God. And then he goes on to say something that I think is really cool here, because it's interesting how science catches up with God. Now, there's a term I have recently become aware of. My son, one of my sons is big into training, executive training, that kind of things. And he says, Dad, there's a term called neuroplasticity. I probably didn't say it right, and I can't spell it, but many of you have probably heard of it. And it's kind of a new study of how the mind can actually be reshaped. Now, I don't know about where you live, but I've lived in the South for a long time. And in the South, one of the phrases I hear all the time that it just, I don't like it, and it is, well, that's just the way I am. Well, you know what? Sometimes that's just not good enough. That's just the way I am. I've always been that way. I guess I'll always be that way. Well, you're a jerk. And you need to change. But I know that for me, sometimes it's a little bit different. I'll say, well, that's the way I am. I can't help it. I mean, but God can. And so here's what he says. Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think on these things. I'm proud of my wife and I. We have found that there is a switch on the remote that allows you to change the channel. I learned this about 5 or 6 years ago. And I'm going to tell you something I'm not real proud of, but I think you'll get my point. We were watching the halftime of the Super Bowl. And the halftime of the Super Bowl that year was just what I would call soft pornography. Y'all know what I'm talking about? Some of you don't get all shocked, okay? And we sat there and watched the whole thing with my sons and grandsons. Later, we got to talking about, even the grandsons were like, wow, that was pretty bad. That's what we should have done. But it was like God slapped me up alongside the head, and we have learned that, no, we're not going to watch that. Oh, it's an interesting story. Nope, the language, nope. Nope. Because I want to fill my mind with godly things. I want to have joy, and I'm not going to have joy watching those things and listening to those things and talking about those things and reading those things that are not godly. It robs you of your joy. Neuroplasticity. You can actually change. Now, here's how that works. You've got this part of your brain, maybe it's something you're dealing with, something you're struggling with, and you just feel like it's so powerful you can't overcome it. And it probably is very powerful. But when you develop the habit of doing something other than that thing, it starts out, it's kind of like lifting weights. And you get in there and you go, I got 50 pounds. I was in charge of the weightlifting and training for football for 10 years. And I loved taking a little skinny little kid in there. I loved taking the basketball players in there saying, if I could make you grow 4 inches this year, would you do whatever I asked you to? Oh, can you do that, coach? I said, no. But I can make you jump 4 inches higher. And so what happens when we have these bad habits is they have become muscle bound in our lives and we can't control them. So we take this other little part of our brain and we start exercising it. Before long, it overpowers the negative. That's neuroplasticity. But God already knew that. And then the final thing he says that I want us to look at is he says, whatever things you have learned or received from me or seen in me, put them into practice. We've got to practice our Christianity. We've got to practice the things that we know. Most of us have built our faith on what we don't do. And the don't do's are not going to fill your life with joy. It might be. I mean, if you've been an alcoholic or drug addict, I'm sure you feel joy of getting over. If you had a foul mouth, there's a certain amount of joy for getting that kind of language out of your mind. If you've been hooked on pornography, yes, there's a joy to, finally I broke that. But the real joy in Christianity is practicing our faith, doing what God has asked us to do. I have a picture in my office. It's of a young lady. She's probably 17 or 18 actually, still in high school. She had all kinds of problems. She had a mom that was a problem. She had a dad that deserted her. She wore black and had black fingernails. That tell you enough? But she went on a mission trip with us. But I have a picture of her in Jamaica carrying a little child around whose legs don't work. And that child has her arms around this girl's neck. And I can see her face, and I got a picture of it. And she's beaming. I believe it might have been the first time she'd been happy in years. And why was she happy? Why did she have joy? Because she was doing what God wanted her to do. You want joy? These things you have seen and heard, put them into practice. Now, I want to tell you that I'm a realist. And I think sometimes when preachers come along and they tell you to do something, it's easy. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say rejoice. But what I've noticed about God's word is he doesn't tell us to do something that he doesn't tell us how to do it. We do that to each other. And preachers are really bad about it. You know, you need to do this, you need to do that. Okay, how? Philippians chapter 4 tells us to rejoice, and then he tells us how. If you're here and you're looking for that joy or that peace that God offers, we want to help you any way we can. If you need somebody to pray with you, this is a praying church. They will pray with you. If you need somebody to help you to look at things in a different way, in a better way, we'll do that. If you've never put Christ on, that's a joy that will bring joy to us all. because the heaven rejoice when what lost is found. If you need to come, do so as we stand and sing.